Hello, I am Sinner and I am doing another copyrighted, probably, um, reading of Aristotle. This time we're going to try and smash through book Gamma. Uh, yeah, that's all I really have to say. But yeah, let's get into it. Let me just check the stream's working. Yeah, it's working. Let's go. Alrighty. And let me actually, before we even start, let's get some lo-fi beats going. Hmm.
All right, check this out. I just dragged a task in
I
my
love
project,
ads.
and this new AI
I
tool
love
built my entire week.
advertisements.
It's scheduled.
Alrighty. Let us begin. This is also good because my headphones have this system where they'll shut themselves off if you um don't have anything playing, which is kind of annoying. Anyway, let's begin. Aristotle is now in a position to give what is presumably his definitive statement of what philosophy and especially metaphysics is. There must be, he tells us, a science of being just qua being, which will be different from all other departmental sciences, which deal with some limited part of being. The study of being qua being turns out to be the same thing as the study of the primary causes. Now, qua, I always forget what qua means. In capacity of, as being. Yeah, so it's being in the capacity of being. The study of being qua being turns out to be the same thing as the study of the primary causes and principles, which has previously been said to be the task of philosophy, because the primary causes and principles are the causes and principles of being qua being. I would agree. So now, after Alpha and Alpha the Lesser and a big introduction, we actually get to start getting into the philosophy of the book. There's a kind of science whose remit, I don't know what this word means. Remit means to send. So no Google definition. Nope. To send money to someone. Huh. There's a kind of science whose remit is being qua being, and the things pertaining to that which is per se. This science is not the same as any of the departmental disciplines, for none of these latter engages in this general speculation, but about that which is qua that which is. Rather, they delimit some section of what is and study its accidental features. A prime example is mathematics. We, however, are investigating principles and fundamental causes, and these must evidently pertain per se to a kind of nature. Now, the traditional search for the elements of things that there are is in fact the search for these very principles. So the elements too of that which it must pertain, of that which is must pertain to it, not accidentally but qua thing that is. And by some token, this inquiry also comprises the investigation of the primary causes of that which is qua that which it is. Wow, that was a very short chapter. That was a paragraph. We have now learnt that first philosophy is the study of the causes and principles of being qua being. However, this will not help us greatly until we have a clear understanding of what being is. This is perplexed by the fact that there is a great variety of accounts of being, but fortunately there is a common link between them, in that all accounts of being are given with reference to a focal account, which is the account of being as substance. We can We can, therefore, still more precisely define the task of philosophy as the study of causes and principles of substance, of the causes and principles of substance. At the same time, although this is the central task of philosophy, it does not exhaust the business of philosophy, which is interested in the other accounts of being, though seen from the perspective of the account of being as substance. Being is also very closely associated with unity and the one, so it also comes within the remit of the philosopher to study unity and its various related items, such as number, identity, similarity, etc. Also, as we are later told, philosophy will interest itself in plurality, the contrary of unity, since all sciences study contraries and so consider difference, dissimilarity, etc. Aristotle also draws a distinction here between the philosophy which has to do with primary suprasensible substance and that which has to do with secondary sensible substance. The former is first, the latter second philosophy. It is not clear how exactly this distinction is to be squared with the account of philosophy as the study of being qua being. In the bulk of the Metaphysics, and especially in books Zeta and Eta, the distinction between primary and secondary substance does not seem to play a crucial part. Rather, Aristotle is concerned to get clear about the difficult notion of substance itself, and, in a sense, the causes and principles of substance, pretty much as announced at the start of the present chapter. Now that which is indeed spoken of in many ways, but is spoken of with regard to one thing, and a single kind of nature. It is not spoken by homonymity. I can't speak English. Its position is similar to that with health. Everything that is healthy is spoken of with regard to health. So, one thing is said to be healthy by dint of preserving health, another by dint of producing it, another by being a sign of it. Bless me. Another by being capable of having it. Also, with the medical, a thing is said to be medical with regard to the art of medicine. One thing is said to be medical by dint of having the art of medicine, another by being naturally adjusted to it, another by being a function of it. And this, of course, will not exhaust the examples of things spoken of with regard to something in this way. It is in just this way that which is, although spoken of in many ways, is nevertheless always spoken of with regard to the single principle. So yeah, okay, I get what he's saying here. So he's basically saying, like, being is spoken of in regard to other things as having being, right? As in having the capability of producing it, or preserving it, or being, you know. All that jazz. Yummy coffee. So some things are called things that are because they are substances. Other things are called things that are because they are affections of a substance. Also, some things are so called because they are a way into substance, or because they are destructions or deprivations or qualities of a substance, or productive or generative of a substance, or of the things that are spoken of with regard to substance, or a negation either of a substance or one of these latter, and hence we say even that which is not is what is not. I will also say with deprivations, this is my understanding of evil, is that good is something that positively exists and evil is something that's a deprivation, in the same way that coldness is a deprivation, or silence is a deprivation. You know, science doesn't exist positively, right? It exists as, it has no substance, but it exists as a deprivation of sound. And so evil in this case is a deprivation of good. That's just my personal view. I don't know what you guys would say. Okay, for everything that is healthy, there is one single science. Surely this one should be the case in a parallel way with the other things spoken of in this way. For the domain of a single science is not set only by things spoken of in a single, but also by things spoken of with regard to a single nature. Indeed, there is a way in which these latter are also spoken of in a single respect. It, therefore, does indeed belong, if this is right, to some single science to study the things that are qua the things that are. These are a lot of different ways of saying being, qua being, but we're here for it. Now, it is a quite general feature of science that its overriding concern is with its primary object, that on which the rest of its domain depends, and because of which the things in that domain are called what they are. So if, in the case of things that are, the primary object is substance, then we can state that the fundamental duty of the philosopher is to gain possession of the principles and causes of substances. That's true. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to save that for later. That's a nice quote. Now, every single genus has its own single perceptual range and its own single proprietary science. Grammar, for instance, is a single science, covering all spoken sounds. Therefore, there must be one science, single, in kind, that considers how many forms there are of that which is qua that which is, and the forms of those forms. I feel like that's something he'll probably talk about in the categories. I'm not sure. Now consider this possibility. Okay, I'm considering. That which is and the one are the same thing. What? Yeah. Oh, that which is and the one, as in, okay, I had a brain fart. I thought he was saying things that exist are the same as things that exist. That which is a way of his translator's way of saying being, and the one as a term of unity are the same thing. Okay, that would actually seem to be more revelatory than just saying being is being. They are a single nature by dint of their always accompanying one another, as do principle and cause. There will still be no single account by which they are both disclosed. We could, in fact, equally easily imagine for these purposes that they did have the same account. Far from weakening the position, this would actually strengthen it. It is indeed surely plausible that one man and a man in existence and a man simpliciter are the same thing. Simpliciter. Now, this was in the table of terms that we read at the start, simply unconditionally.
Simpliciter.
But yeah, it was in the terms at the start. I'm very certain, but let's not worry about that. You know what I mean? so is simpliciter. Nothing is added by the extension of the expression he is one man, he is one man that is. It is also clear that these terms are not separated either in their coming to be or in their destruction. The same goes for one thing. So it is quite clear that in this sort of case, the addition of words does not change the reference. Ah, that's actually a really interesting proof. I've never thought of that. The fact that you can prove two things are the same by showing that no extra information is added by adding them, right? Like, he is one man and he is one man that is. Presumably, if you're referencing an actual human being that exists, it is the same. I mean, if it's a fictional being, then sure, there would be a distinction there, but yeah, I've never thought about that. The fact that if the addition of words does not change the reference in some way, it's actually proof that the two things are similar or the same. You know, that's cool. And that the one is not something else alongside that which is, and that substance of each thing is non-accidentally a single thing. And the same goes for that which a certain kind of thing is. So there must be as many forms of that which is as there are of the one. And the what it is of such things, I think that's essence. I think that's, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that's essence. And the essence of such things, i.e. the same and the similar and the rest of that sort, fall under the same science, single in kind. And the opposites are all, in effect, derived from this principle, as we have sufficiently established in the enumeration of opposites. Is that another book, or is that like in the categories or something? Aristotle. I can't spell, forgive me. Oh, in this table. Yeah, okay. We saw this. Limited, unlimited, odd, even. One plurality, left, right, male, female. At rest, moving, straight, crooked. Good, bad, square, oblong. There are two as many departments of philosophy as there are substances, which requires that among the latter there must be a primary and subsequent, and given the immediate divisions of that which is are genera, there will be one science for each genus. Thus the philosopher has the same sort of project as those as mathematicians. Mathematics too has departments, with a primary and secondary science and a series of studies thereafter. The study, too, of each pair of opposites is the province of a single science. Now the opposite of the one is plurality. That's true. Footnote: a single science studies the negation and privation of a thing because it studies in both ways the single thing that is negated or in privation. There are two ways of negating. Either we can say that a thing does not obtain, simpliciter, or we can say that a thing does not pertain to a kind. The second way of negating involves the addition of a differential to the single thing, and not just the negating factor. Since the negation of a thing in this way marks an absence, by contrast, in the case of privation, some underlying nature also arises, whose privation it is said to be. I see. As we are saying, plurality is the opposite of the one. So the science we have... I should have probably mentioned this before. When these guys talk about... When Aristotle talks about science, it's more like the ancient Greek notion of science, as far as I know. It's not really like the notion of science as a how do I put it? Like it's not science in the sense of like, oh, we're using the scientific method or anything like that. It's more just like the specific study of something, as far as I'm aware. Because all like philosophy is considered a science at this time. Our science would be considered natural science. Yeah, it's the term has changed meaning over time, so it's important to keep that in mind. So the science we have specified must also cognize the opposites of the things that we have mentioned. The other, the dissimilar, the unequal, and such other things are spoken of either in relation to one of these, or in relation to plurality and the one. And opposition itself is one such thing, for opposition is a kind of differentia, and the differentia is an otherness, since, then, the one is said in many ways. These things too will also have been said in many ways, and yet it belongs to a single science to take cognizance of them all. It does not suffice for them to fall to different sciences, just as they are spoken of in many ways. For it is also necessary that the accounts have neither single aspect nor single reference connection. In any case, everything is connected to the primary, so all things said to be one are connected to the primary one. Ditto for the same, the other, and the opposites. Ditto. What does ditto mean? It's not that ditto, that's for sure. The same thing again, used in a list of accounts indicated ditto mark under.
Ditto.
Oh. Right. Yeah. I get it. I used to do this when I had to do like lists in school. I was running a long list. Huh. What a coinky dink. Ditto for the same and for the opposite. So once we have distinguished in how many ways a thing is spoken of, we must demonstrate in what way it is spoken with regard to that which is primary in each relevant category. And some things will turn out to be thus related by dint of compromising the primary, others by dint of producing it, and others in other similar ways. The conclusion of all this is very clear. There must be some one science that gives an account of all these items and also gives an account of substance. Substance, in fact, was one of the puzzles that we looked at. And the philosopher should be able to engage in the study of all these items. For who, except the philosopher, is going to ask whether Socrates and Socrates seated is the same thing? Who is going to ask whether one is opposite to one? I like that quote. I think that's a banger quote. I'm going to store that quote somewhere else, because I'm silly like that. I'm not silly like that. I'm quite boring. Anyway, or indeed, opposite is what is spoken of. The same goes for all the rest of such items. They are all per se properties of that which is one qua that which is one, and of that which is qua that which is, not qua numbers or lines or fires. Of course, it is the task of philosophy to get to know both their essence and their accidents. The shortcoming of current examinations of these topics is not their failure to be philosophy, but the priority of substance, on which the current philosophical consensus has no view. There are affections peculiar to number qua number, oddness and evenness, commensurability and equality, excess and deficiency, and which pertain to numbers both per se and in mutual relation. And there are similar lists for the solid and unchanging, the changing, the weightless, and the weighted. And in such, in just the same way, there are peculiarities of that which is just qua that which is. And it is the truth about these that the philosopher is after. A pointer to this is the fact that dialecticians and sophists, I don't think Aristotle spoke French. That's just a guess of mine. Prenant la lure des philosophies. Something about the lure. What does this mean? Translation? Take on the appearance of philosophers. Why not say that in English? Okay? Because Aristotle didn't speak French. Aristotle did not speak French. So we don't need to throw in a bit of French, okay? I'm just saying. One thing that annoys me about philosophy books is they just expect you to know other languages. This happened when I bought this history of philosophy book on medieval philosophy, and I would say about 2 to 3% of the book wasn't English. It was Latin. They would literally just throw in Latin sentences, Latin words, like every like 8th word would just be Latin, and they would just keep going and not explain anything. It's so annoying. It's so annoying. Sophistry is but philosophy in appearance only, and the scope of dialect is every item, which all have in common only that they are things that are. And in fact, it is quite clear that his breadth of dialectic debate is motivated by the fact that all things that are proprietary to philosophy. Sophistry, dialectic, philosophy, they all have the same genus as their domain, but philosophy differs from dialectic in the manner of its powers, and from sophistry in the choice of life that it involves. Dialectic experiments with the topics on which philosophy gives knowledge, whereas sophistry bears the appearance of philosophy, but not in reality. One thing about Aristotle I do know is that he doesn't like sophists. So, like, he takes plenty of time out of his books to just, like, insult sophists, basically, from my knowledge. Now, one of the two columns of opposites is always the privation column, and all the items in both columns are derived from that which is and that which is not, from one and plurality. For example, stasis is derived from one and movement from plurality. But it is also true that almost everybody agrees that the things that are and substance are composed of opposites. At least everybody claims that the principles are opposite. Some have it that they are odd and even, some that they are hot and cold, some limit and limitless. Others love and strife. It needs no demonstration that all the others are also derived from one and plurality. Let us not linger over the derivation. And even principles proposed by other schools fall naturally into these kinds. So this is yet another way of showing that there is a single science for that which is qua that which is. For all things are either opposites or derived from opposites, and the principles of the opposites are one and plurality. And the opposites, whether spoken of in single aspect style or not, are the province of a single science. The latter is no doubt more plausible. And yet, even if the one is spoken of in many ways, the others will be spoken of with regard to the primary, and so also with the opposites. Yeah, so what I'm getting from this is like, he's basically trying to argue that the study of being is the study of one and opposites as a concept, and he's using these sorts of, this is all just like him proving it by saying like, well, if you actually talk about anything, you talk about it based on what it is and what it isn't, and therefore it's based around whether or not it's one or opposite. And this, even if that which is and the one is not general and the same in all cases or separable, it is in fact probable that they are not, and that some are single aspect while others are from a series. And given all this, it is also hardly surprising if it is not incumbent on the geometer to study what the opposite is, or what the complete, or one, or the same, or the other, save ex hypothesi. What does that mean? Ex hypothesi.
Ex hypothesi.
Ex hypothesi. It's a cool word. Never heard that word before.
Ex hypothesi. Ex hypothesi.
Why does the guy sound like a I don't know how to
Ex
put it.
hypothesi.
It sounds like a Morrowind character is saying this word. Some firm conclusions can be drawn. A single science has as its domain that which is qua that which is, and so its properties qua that which is. This science concerns itself with both substances and their properties, all those we have mentioned, and also prior and posterior, genus and species, the whole and part, all others such. Aristotle has now shown that philosophy is concerned primarily with substance, but also with other accounts of being and with unity and plurality and their related items. He now adds to this list that philosophy is also the study of fundamental principles of demonstration and logic. In making this addition, he is resolving the dilemma by Puzzle 2 of Book Beta, page 51. The reason why it falls to philosophy to study the fundamental principles of logic is that these principles are not concerned with some specific departments of being, such as the departmental sciences study, but with being as a whole, the province of philosophy. It is true that non-philosophers, especially natural scientists, have taken an interest in the past in the foundations of logic, but in so doing, they have been wearing the hat not of the scientist but of the philosopher. In any case, being is wider than nature, so the natural scientists would not be competent to study something that applies to all of it. The rest of Book Gamma is accordingly devoted to the defense of the fundamental principles of demonstration. Aristotle evidently feels that it will not be possible to be certain about the conclusions later to be drawn about substance unless the principles of demonstration itself have first been vindicated. He begins in this chapter by declaring that the most fundamental principle of all is the principle of non-contradiction, about which it is not even possible for us to be deluded. The principle states that it is impossible for the same thing to have and not have the same feature at a same time. It is the principle upon which all other principles of demonstration ultimately rest. Here is another issue. Yeah, I mean, I've sort of already heard this argument, right, about the principle of non-contradiction. I've heard it about other things too, which you would call axioms. Oh, look, haha, axioms. Which is that, like, when something like the principle of non-contradiction or truth, you end up in a situation where in order to not believe it, you have to use it, right? As if you believe it. So it ends up in a position where, like, if you can't not behave without the thing, how can you say the thing doesn't exist? You know what I mean? So, for example, with the principle of non-contradiction, this is what I'm guessing is going to argue, is something along the lines of, you have to have non-contradiction because in order to argue that non-contradiction doesn't exist, you would have to make a non-contradictory argument, right? But, because you can't just like, I mean, technically you could just quote-unquote argue by throwing random words out. Well, non-contradiction doesn't exist because glebe, glob, glob, glebe, it does exist, glebe, glob, glob, it doesn't exist, glob, glebe, glob, glob, glob. And then, if that's your argument, then God help you, but I mean, yeah, you get my point. Here's another issue. Here is another issue to be decided. There is one science both for the so-called axioms of mathematics and for substance, or different ones for each. In fact, the answer is clear, a single science. That of the philosopher also covers the axioms of mathematics. Mathematical axioms, too, apply to all things that there are after all, and not separately to some genus of things demarcated off from others. They are also available to every departmental science, since they are of that which is qua that which is, and of every genus of that which is. But the use made of them by each departmental science is only to the extent that is sufficient for its purposes, i.e. just in regard to the genus for which that science produces its demonstrations. There is, then, no question but that mathematical axioms apply to all things just qua things that are. They constitute indeed the commonality of all of things that are. So the science that gets to grips with that which is qua that which is will also be the science of mathematical axioms. Hence the fact that no departmental science takes a view on the truth or falsity of these axioms. Geometry does not, neither does arithmetic. Some natural scientists do, but that's okay, since they, and only they, conceive themselves as studying nature as a whole, and thus the domain of that which is. However, there is a science higher than natural science, for, in truth, nature is but one genus of that which is. It is a science whose subject matter is universal and which is exclusively concerned with primary substance, and it is also concerned with the axioms of mathematics. Natural science is a kind of philosophy, but it is not first philosophy. Fitful discussion proceeds about the way in which the truth of the axioms of mathematics should be taken. This debate reflects the poverty of current logical training. Okay. Knowledge of mathematical axioms should be propedeutic?
Propedeutic. Propedeutic.
What? Can I get that slower, please? Propedeutic. Propedeutic. There we go. Oh my gosh. Propedeutic.
Propedeutic.
An area of study serving as the preliminary instruction or as the introduction to further study. That was a tough word. I've never seen that word before in my life. Oh, alright, let's continue to philosophy. Not something you pick up while doing it. Okay. What is quite clear is that philosophy, whose domain is the whole of substance in regard to its essential nature, must also examine the principles of logic. The specialist in such genus ought to be able to give the securest principles of his domain. So the specialist in the thing that is qua the things that are, should be able to give the surest principles of this domain, i.e. everything, i.e. of everything. And this quote-unquote specialist is the philosopher, and the securest principle of all is that about which error is impossible. And this sort of principle must also be that which is most completely known, since it is about the unknown that error occurs, and it must be non-hypothetical. Anyone studying anything of the things that are must grasp this principle, and to say that is to say that it is not a mere hypothesis, and to say that is to say not that it is not a mere hypothesis. And if a principle is such that anyone who is to know anything must grasp it, then the approach to any subject matter presupposes mastery of that principle. It brooks then no discussion that this sort of principle is the most secure of all principles. The question is, which principle is this? Yeah, stop gassing us up. Stop hyping us up. Tell us the principle, man. You know, the funny thing is it's so... I kind of like lean into the theory that Aristotle's Metaphysics and like all of his books are very that like there's this theory that they're basically just lecture notes written down by his students. I kind of lean into that a bit because when you read it, it doesn't sound like it's succinct. It sounds like a lecture. You know what I mean? This reads like a lecture script. It doesn't read like an essay. Because you could say this so much more succinctly. But he doesn't. The question is, which principle is this? It is, we are now in a position to say, the principle that P, it is impossible for the same thing at the same time to be... It is impossible for the same thing at the same time both to be in and not to be in the same thing in the same respect. This will bear some logical sharpening, but let that pass for now. So this is just the law of... Is the P means premise, right? That means premise, yeah? I don't know. Anyway, let's continue. Here, indeed, we have our securest of all principles, which entirely fits the standards that we have set. No one can believe that the same thing both is and is not. On one interpretation, this is the point that Heraclitus was making. What, of course, is not impossible is that one can say one thing and believe another. It is then not possible for opposites to be in the same subject at the same time. Again, with the usual logical provisos. Paste. Provisos.
Proviso.
I've heard proviso before. But also the opinion opposite to an opinion is the negation of it. And this makes clear why it is impossible for the same person to believe the same thing, both is and is not at the same time. For if one were to fall into such error, it would amount to the simultaneous holding of opposite beliefs with regard to that object, and that is why the principle is the ultimate root of all demonstration. It is the very nature to be the principle of all other axioms. I'm gonna save that. Okay, let's continue. Aristotle now begins with his remarkable defense of the principle of non-contradiction. It might be felt that so fundamental a principle cannot be defended, but must simply be accepted as the foundation of all reasoning. But Aristotle, while allowing that it cannot be demonstrated in any normal sense, since a demonstration would have to proceed from some still more fundamental principle, and this would generate an infinite regress, nevertheless offers a demonstration by refutation. The idea is that if one denies the principle from whatever direction, it can be refuted, and the totality of such refutations amounts to an indirect demonstration of the principle. What is required is, in fact, not even that the opponent explicitly denies the principle, but merely that he says anything at all. If he refuses even this, he rules himself out of having anything to say about the foundations of logic, or indeed anything else. But if he does say anything, he is committed to what he says being true and not false, in line with the very principle which he is supposed to be denying. Aristotle hammers the point home with an extraordinary array of arguments. Yeah, so this is what I was saying before, like, in order to deny the law of non-contradiction, you have to rely on the law of non-contradiction to make an argument, because you can't say something is one way and not another, right? If you were to say the law of non-contradiction does not exist, that would imply that you believe that you can't believe that it does not exist and exist while arguing that it does not exist. You see what I mean? For all that, it is certainly the case, as we have been saying, that there are some philosophers who hold both that it is possible for the same thing to be and not to be, that it is possible for us to entertain beliefs to that effect. These claims are used as premises, furthermore, by many natural scientists. Nevertheless, as far as we are concerned, the present argument has shown that the same thing cannot at the same time both be and not be. And indeed, we have gone on to show that this is the securest of all principles. Amazingly, there are even philosophers who try to prove this. This reveals the innocence of logical training. Oh, that's such a beautiful... I'm going to start using that. Innocence of logical training. That's actually such a roast. That's the nicest burn I think I've heard. Innocence of logical training. A major point of such training is to be able to recognize which subject matters require proof and which do not. After all, it must be true, quite generally, that not everything can be proven on pain of an infinite regress, which would in any case undermine the proof. And if there are to be some premises for which it is not appropriate to require proof, these philosophers would be quite unable to give reasons for any other principle to be more of this kind. However, the impossibility of the denial of our principle can in fact be proven. Yeah. It can be done by the elenchus. Elenchus.
Elenchus.
So many words. So many words. I'm like saving, by the way, what I'm doing is I'm just saving these words so that way I can like remember them. I'm gonna write them down. Provided only, of course, that the disputant advances some kind of proposition. Should he choose not to, there is something comical about seeking to refute, and just in that respect, a position that has absolutely no content of any kind. It would be like taking issue with a vegetable. Now we must carefully distinguish between demonstration by means of an elenchus, which means a logical refutation, and demonstration. If this is French, I'm going to be very annoyed. It's French.
Tout court.
Tout court. More French. With no addition or qualification, simply. look, this is something great about reading, right? In the course of like however long I've been streaming, right, which is probably like 20 minutes or something, not that long at all, I've learnt 4 words. To core, which means like without any extra addition, with no extra addition. If, in this case, one attempted a straightforward demonstration, one would be presupposing at the start the very principle to be defended. If, however, the other party advances a comparable first principle, this problem does not arise. One can simply deploy the elenchus rather than assay a demonstration. And the way to start to deal with anything like this is not to demand a statement, either that something is or that it does not. This might well be taken to be begging the original question. Rather, it is to require that he say something with content both for himself and for anybody else, a necessary minimum for any statement. If he will not do this, then his position admits of no rational defense against the internal challenges. For those of anybody else, if once, however, he does make this first meaningful statement, there is something definite enough to get to grips with, and the proof can proceed. But the whole process has not been initiated by the conductor of the proof, but by its victim, since the elimination of his initial statement that he comes to accept the correct account. Also, anyone who accepts the challenge will ipso have agreed that there is something true independently of proof. As a result of all this, it will not turn out to be the case that everything is such that it is in a certain way also is not in the same way. Here then is how the proof proceeds. First assumption. We take it to be self-evident that the locution? Wow.
Locution.
So many words, man. To be and the locution not to be both have a definite meaning. This, I think, rules out at least the possibility that everything both is in a certain way and is not in that way. Elucidation. Suppose the locution man has a definite meaning. Let us say a biped animal. Then what is meant by having a definite meaning is just this. If some arbitrary item is a man, and if there is something that you have to be in order to be a man, then this will be what it is to be a man for that item. Footnote. In fact, it makes no difference even if one allows there to be several meanings for these locutions, provided that the number is definite. For a different locution could be assigned to each account. In the present case, if we denied that man was univocal, and that for one of its several meanings the proprietary account was biped animal, it would still be perfectly possible for there to be a definite plurality of other meanings, just by the assignment of a proprietary locution for each account, where, on the other hand, these assignments not to be made, and the number of meanings to be infinite, then we would not in effect be dealing with a possible ingredient in a proposition, for this kind is non-univocally, or is of non-univocality, is meaningless. If locutions have no meaning, mutual communication is eliminated, and so, to tell the truth, it is internal consistency of thought. A man cannot think unless he thinks of some single thing, and if such thought is possible for him, what is to stop the assignment of a locution to an object of his thought? Given all that, we may as well revert to our original supposition, that the locution has a meaning and that it has only one meaning. This rules out the possibility that by to be a man, whatever not to be a man is meant, provided possibility that by to be a man, whatever is meant, provided man not only has meaning in regard to a single thing, but has the meaning of a single thing in B. It's not meaning in regard to a single thing that we consider to be having a single meaning. We are making the equation, the musical, the white, the man, might all have meant a single thing, a semantic shortcut by dint of their synonymy to monism. We can say further that it will not only be possible for the same thing to be and not to be by dint of homonymy, paste. Homonymy. By dint of homonymy. For example, what we call man and others would call. But our present question is not whether it is possible for the same thing to be and not to be in regard to the locution, but whether possible in regard to the object. But if man and not man do not mean something different, it cannot be denied that not to be a man will be the same thing as to be a man. And this will mean that to be a man will just be not to be a man, since they will be a single thing. That is what it is to be a single thing, after all. It is to be like raiment and cloak, assuming that their proprietary count is one. And if to be a man and not to be a man are a single thing, then to be a man and not to be a man have a single meaning. However, a proof has been afforded of not their meaning a single thing, and so it is necessary that, if it is right to say of anything that it is a man, that thing must be a biped animal, what man meant, and if this is necessary, then it is not possible for the same thing at the same time to not be a biped animal. That is, the force of saying that something is necessary is to deny the possibility that it is not to be the case. So we have our proof. It is not possible to say truly at the same time that the same thing both is and is not a man. Exactly the same reasoning can be used on not to be a man. To be a man and not to be a man mean different things, on the assumption only that they, to be white and to be a man, are different. After all, the former pair are much more directly opposed, which would bring with it their meaning different things. If in face of this, the tack is taken that the white and man do mean a single thing, the same thing, indeed, we will simply redeploy the argument given above, that this leads to monism, for everything, not just opposites. Assuming this cannot be right, the argument goes through as described. All that was necessary was to get an answer to the first question. I mean, this is the thing, he words it in such a weird way. I understand the concept, but he's wording it in such a bizarre way. Which is that, he is correct. If you are to say, someone is a man, that comes with it meaning and distinction from not man. So then to argue that someone is a man and isn't a man is to argue something meaningless, because something it's like a blank, you know what I mean? You're not saying anything at all, really. It's a failing, it's a logical failing. and things cannot. So like, and even when you say this is a man, you are necessarily saying that it is not a man. You know what I mean? Another dodge might be as follows. We put the question without qualifications, but our opponent in replying adds the contradictories. But this just means he is not, in fact, replying to the question at all. For on these assumptions, there is nothing to stop man, white, and endlessly many other things being the same. No, we must insist that, to the question whether it is true that a given object is or is not a man, an answer that means a single thing must be returned. We cannot accept the addition of, say, it is also white and large. It is indeed impossible to go through all such accidental properties of the object, and we are quite entitled to insist that our opponent add all or none. And it follows in exactly parallel style that even if the same thing is in 1,000 ways both man and not man, it is still not acceptable as part of a reply to the question whether or not it is a man. To add that it is also simultaneously not a man, unless the respondent is prepared to add all the other accidental properties too, which the entity either is or is not. To attempt this last project would be to drop off the map of the philosophical debate. A more general complaint can also be raised. It is that the adoption of this theory carries with it the elimination of substance and essence. In effect, it commits you to saying that all properties are accidents, and that there is nothing which is to be a man or an animal. For suppose that there is something which it is to be a man, this will not be a non-man, or not be a man. I take that these are the negations. After all, there was a single thing that man meant, to wit the substance of a certain thing. And to have the substance of a certain thing as meaning is to have the meaning that nothing else than that is what it is to be that thing. Oh my god, this is so dense. If, however, in the present case, to be a man just is either to be a non-man or not to be a man, then it will be something else other than what it is to be a man. That is why this position ends up saddled with the consequence that there cannot be a proprietary account of this kind of anything. Hence all properties are accidents, given that it is in terms of a proprietary account that we draw the distinction between substance and accident. So the white is an accidental property of a man, in as much as the man A is white, but B is not white, is not what it is to be white. But this disastrous result, if all predication is accidental, there will be no primary subject, assuming that in all cases an accidental property indicates a category item pertaining to some subject. The absence of such subject produces straight off an infinite regress, but such a regress is also impossible. There cannot be a concatenation Concatenation. Look at all these words. Very cool. Concatenation. There cannot be concatenation even of more than two accidents. Argument A. An accident is not an accident of an accident, except in that they are both accidents of the same subject. In the same sense, white is accidentally musical and musical is accidentally white, and they are both accidental properties of a man. B. When Socrates is musical, This is not because both Socrates and musical are accidental properties of something else. So there are these two ways in which things are said to be accidental properties. Now things said to be accidental properties in the way that white is said to be accidental of Socrates, cannot extend upwards to infinity by dint of there being an accidental properties of Socrates white, and so on. No single thing will emerge from such a pillar of predicates. But also, too, there will be no further accidental property just of the white, say the musical. There is no reason for saying that the musical is accidental to the white any more than that the white is accidental to the musical. So I think what he's doing here is like, and even if this is denied, we fall back to the distinction between this A accidentality and B accidentality. For example, musical to Socrates. For B accidents, being an accident of an accident is ruled out. It is only for accidents that it is possible. This preludes its being the case that every property is predicated accidentally. The point is this: on these assumptions there must be something that indicates substance, but once this is conceded, we have a proof that the simultaneous predication of the contraries is impossible. So what he's saying here is like, accidental properties cannot be used as a way to quote-unquote break the law of non-contradiction, because if you try and use an accidental property to break the law of non-contradiction, you would necessarily need to say that that accidental property effectively has the ability to create other accidental properties which it can't do, right? You know, you could say a zebra is white and black at the same time, but that is not a contradiction because you're describing the accidental properties of parts of a zebra, as opposed to describing the zebra as such, if that makes sense. You're not saying in essence the zebra is both white and black at the same time. You're describing two accidental properties of the zebra, which is the color of its fur, right? So the only way you could make that work is by saying that no, the accidental property comprises the being, is like part of the being. But then if that's the case, then all accidental properties are part of the being, and you can't define anything, and nothing makes any sense. That's sort of what I'm getting out of this, which makes sense. I think that's a sound argument. Okay, if all contradictories are simultaneously true of the same thing, we can take it as settled that we get monism, a trireme.
Trireme.
Trireme. I am saving that word too. I'm a word saver. A wall and a man will be the same thing. For if anything at all is possible, both to assert and to deny any given claim, anyone who signs up for Protagoreanism teachings of the sophist Protagoras of Abdera. Okay. For anyone who signs up has bit this bullet. It suffices, after all, for someone to think that the man in question is not a trireme, for it is to be indisputable that he is not a trireme. But this just means that he is a trireme. If the negation is as true as the assertion, in fact, we get not just Protagoreanism, but Anaxagoreanism, the doctrine of all things at once. Nothing really exists as a single thing. The best interpretation is that the present view is really about the intermediate. They are deluded in thinking that they are talking about what is. In fact, they are talking about what is not. Anything that is in potentiality and not in entelechy. Entelechy.
Entelechy.
Entelechy. Oops. Hold on. Oops. Entelechy. You know what's funny? After reading all this, I'm gonna actually have to study for my exams. That's fun. Is the intermediate. The result is that they are committed to the joint assertion, and denial of every property of every subject, on the pain of the absurd consequence that for each subject the negation of the subject itself is available, but not the negation of something else which is not a property of it. Let me clarify from the present example. If it is true to say that of a man that he is not a man, then it is evidently also true to say of him either that he is or that he is not a trireme. So if the assertion can be made, then too can the negation, whereas if the assertion cannot be made, then at least the negation corresponding to it will be available to a greater extent than the negation of the thing itself. So if the negation of the thing itself is available, as our opponents claim, then so too will be that of the thing being a trireme. This is just like a reductio ad absurdum. And if the negation of this can be made, so too can its assertion. Well, this is what happens when you adopt this crazy view, and you also lose the exclusive dichotomy of assertion and negation. If it is true that something is both a man and not a man, it will also, of course, be true that it is neither a man or not a man. There are two negations of the two assertions. The first of the assertions is treated as a compound of the two. Then the two would be a single opposite compound. Also, either this is true of all subjects and everything both is white and is not white, and both is and is not, and so pari passu for all other assertions and negations. Pari passu. Is equal to step or on equal footing. Insolvency. So it just means like equally? Meaning with equal step or on equal footing. And so for equal footing of all the other assertions and negations. It is not, but rather true of... Hold on one second, let me just plunk that in. Some, but not of others. Now, if A, it is not true for all assertions, then for which it is not true will have to be conceded to us, while B, if B, it is true for all, then either I. Wherever the assertion is true, so will the negation be, and wherever the negation is true, so will the assertion be. Or wherever the assertion is true, so will the negation be. So it will not be the case that wherever the negation is true, so will the assertion be. Now in B, it would turn out that there is something which is brutally, there is something which brutally is not, and the corresponding belief will be a secure one. But if a belief that something is not the case is secure and perspicuous to the mind, the opposite positive association would still be more perspicuous. However, if B1 is right, then necessarily either you get a true statement by disjointing the items. So one says that a thing is white and also that it is not white. Or you do not if... what is that? It's alpha. If alpha, you do not get true statements by disjointing the terms, it then follows both that the position under attack has shifted and that nothing exists, and then the question of how non-existence could do things like speaking and walking. On top of that, all things will be one, see above, and God, trireme, and the stone will be the same thing, also will their contradictories. After all, assuming contradictories operate in the same way for all subjects, there can be no difference between subject and subject in this respect. If there were a difference, then that would be something true by a special property, and if theta, is that theta? Which one is this? I think it's, oh, never mind. But if it is possible to get true statements by disjointing terms, then the consequence we have claimed goes through and is crowned by the further consequences that all men speak the truth, that all men are in error, and that the holder of the view is himself acknowledging that he is himself wrong. Nor does this prevent also being the case that the debate is about nothing at all. Our opponent will still say nothing. He speaks in neither one way nor another, but speaks in both ways at the same time. And of course, at the same time, he is negating both these and insisting that he is speaking neither in one way nor in the other. If he does not do this, then he is stuck with something definite one way or the other. If, furthermore, it is the case, whenever the assertion is true, the negation is false, then it will not be possible both to assert and to negate the same thing truly at the same time. Perhaps, however, the opponent might take the rejoinder that whether this so was all along the real question. Can it also be that anyone who believes that something must either be or not be in some given way is embroiled in falsehood, whereas anyone who thinks that it is both has the truth? For if such a person does have the truth, that would be the content of the claim that the nature of the thing that is of this kind, and if he does not have it, but at least has it to a greater extent than the holder of the former belief, then also there would be some definite way in which things that are, and this would be true and not also true, and not also at the same time not true. If, however, the holders of any view speak both truth and falsity in exactly the same way, it will not be possible for anyone in these circumstances either to give utterance or to say anything of content, for such a person is, at the same time, saying such and such is the case, and that it is not. And if he has not serious belief anyway, but is merely equivalently both, entertaining and not entertaining a thought, in what respect would he be at the advantage over a mere plant life? All this makes it especially clear that nobody is really in these circumstances, neither any of those who advance this argument nor anybody else. Why would, after all, if someone thinks that he should walk to Megara, does he actually do so rather than merely twiddle his toes? Why does he not just get up first thing and walk into a well, or if he finds one over a cliff? In fact, he seems rather careful about cliffs and wells. He, for this part, does not seem to think that falling into or over is no more bad than it is good. On the contrary, he he is of the settled opinion that the outcome of the cliff well episode is better than the other. Well, his dogmatism will immediately embroil him in holding that one item is a man, and that some other thing is not a man, and that one thing is pleasant, and that some other thing is not pleasant. Anyone who thinks that it is preferable in some circumstances to drink water and to see a man, and attempts to do these things, is not someone framing his strategies and beliefs on the basis of global indifferentism. That's true. This is sort of going into like the argument that like no one will act out the belief that the law of non-contradiction is false, because again, in order to do so, there would be nothing wrong with walking over a cliff, because walking over a cliff and not walking over a cliff would be to say like walking over a cliff is bad is to imply that, how do I put it? It's like so mind-bending, but like if you were to say walking over a cliff is bad, then you are saying that you're saying at the same time that not walking over a cliff is good. But if you hold to this like, oh, the law of non-contradiction doesn't exist, then walking over a cliff being bad and walking over a cliff being good are actually equally valid. So it shouldn't matter if you do or do not walk off of a cliff. And yet, that is just what their basis should be, if indeed both man and not man are the same thing in the same way. In fact, however, as we have labored to proclaim, you do not come across all that many people of whom it is not true that they carefully avoid some possibilities while showing the most extravagant insouciance towards others. So it would seem that there is at least one area where the disposition is pretty universal to suppose that things are one way or the other, the area of bottom line good or bad. And if you say that they do not know but merely have opinions, so much the worse. They should be all the more concerned that their opinions are true, just as someone who is ailing is likely to be concerned about his health than someone in the pink of it. Besides the knower, the opiner, someone with an... Didn't even know that was a word. There's so many words I'm learning today. Oh, is my internet good? It is. Sorry. Opiner. Meaning. English. To nod. It does not mean to nod. One that opines. Says the knower, the opiner is in a poor way as far as truth is concerned. I think this means like to have an opinion, right? For knower, but for opinion. One final argument. Okay, let us suppose, as much as you like, that things are always both thus and so and so. Thus and so, and not thus and so. Still, are the greater and the lesser present in the nature of the things that are. After all, we would not say that 2 and 3 are even to the same extent. And the man who mistakes a tetrad for a pentad is not as erroneous as he who takes it for a chiliad. What's a chiliad? A set of however many numbers? A group of 1,000.
Chiliad.
Rare noun. I got a rare noun pull. I just unboxed a rare noun. That's awesome, bro. But then, if they are not equally erroneous, this can only mean that one has less and one more of the truth. But now, if to have more of something is to be closer to the thing of which you have more, then there will indeed be a kind of truth closer to which is the one who has more of it. And even if that is not the case, there is, at any rate, something here more like the truth, more grounded, and that is enough. With that, we have dispensed with that indifferentism which would block us from arriving at any definition in our thoughts. We got 2 more, 3 more, and then we are done. 13 pages about. The demonstration continues, becoming more specifically directed against particular opponents of the principle. The most important of these is Protagoras, whose relativism entails the rejection of the principle. Aristotle also distinguishes between objection to the principle based on genuine reflection on natural phenomena and objections based on purely heuristic or gratuitous arguments.
Heuristic.
Of characterized by debate or argument. The latter are actually harder to refute, since it is necessary to descend to the level of the opponent. The bulk of the chapter is taken up with arguments against those who suppose that the principle is in some way undermined by the fact that with sensible entities contrary features appear to be both based on the same subject, and also with some arguments which in some other way question the principle on the basis of the observation of nature. Aristotle reviews a wide range of earlier thinkers, including Homer, before concentrating his fire on Protagoras himself as follows. The same opinion is the basis of the position of Protagoras. Boo! 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 We all hate Protagoras. All my homies hate Protagoras. His position, that just examined, must stand or fall together, for if all opinions held and all appearances are true, then they must be at all times the same time both true and false. It will often happen, after all, that 2 men hold opposite opinions, such that they think that those who do not believe as they do have lapsed into error. And this can only mean that the same thing is both true and not true. But also, on this assumption, all opinions held must be true. Right believers and the wrong believers believe opposite things, so that if the things that are supposed on this view, they must both believe in truths. There can be no dispute but that both positions stem from the same basic mindset. But this does not mean that they are all to be dealt with in the same way. Some need persuasion, some compulsion. Some philosophers have taken up this sort of position out of sheer perplexity. Their ignorance can easily be alleviated. The treatment applies not to their particular arguments as such, but to their mindsets. Others, however, adopt the position for various vexatious purposes. For this, the treatment is refutation of the actual word spoken, using the very same terms and opponents. If we consider those motivated by genuine perplexity, we find that they were driven to this view by considering the sensible object. One way of being driven to the view is by observing that opposites arise from the same sensible thing, and concluding that statements and their negations or contraries must simultaneously be true. The argument is that which is not cannot come into being. The argument is that which is not cannot come into being. So the sensible object in question must have antecedently existed, antecedent, earlier time. So the sensible object in question must have antecedently existed as both the thing that is, as both the things that it is. Hence Anaxagoras' mixture of all and Democritus's variation on the same thing, on the same theme. For him, full and the empty are similarly present in all parts. These correspond respectively to what is and what is not. The way to deal with anyone basing opinion on this sort of consideration is as follows. They should be told that in a way they are right and in a way wrong. That which is spoken of in two ways, so that there is a way in which it is possible for something to come to be from that which is not, and a way in which it is not possible. By the same token, the same thing can be both a thing that is and a thing that is not, but only not in the same respect. In potentiality, a single thing can be simultaneous opposites. In actuality, it cannot. On top of this, we invite them to accept that there is a certain other substance pertaining to the things that are, a substance characterized neither by movement or by destruction, nor by coming into being in any way. I'm saving that. Okay. Another way of getting to the truth equals appearance doctrine from observables of sensibles is this. You start by insisting that the judgment of truth is not an appropriate matter for majorities and minorities. Then you allow that when two men taste the same thing, one will very often find it sweet and the other bitter. Suppose then that all men were sick or deranged, save one or two who were healthy and of the right mind. It would then be the latter who would be thought to be sick and deranged, and the former not. In the same vein, many animals have sensory impressions quite at odds with ours, and around the same objects. Nay, the self-same individual can be at odds with himself as to whether he takes the same matters of appearance to be true at all times. But there can be no principled way of deciding which of these various impressions is true and which is false. It seems that none of them is any better placed than the others. They are all in the same boat, hence the dichotomous conclusion of Democritus. Either there is no truth or it is concealed from us. The underlying assumption of this whole approach is as follows. Discernment is identified with perception, and perception with the alteration of the sensory organ. That is why they say that what appears in sensation must be what is true. That is the reasoning that led Empedocles and Democritus, and let's face it, all the rest of them into these erroneous doctrines. Empedocles certainly signs up for the view that any state change is a cognitive change. Quote, from what stands before him is the thought of man increased. Somewhere else he has. So far as to into other states they came, new thoughts presented wisdom to their minds. Parmenides, for his part, said has the same ring to him. For as each time lie the jointed limbs, so is the mind of man configured. No other organ is but the limbs, that thinks of every man for every one, and the thought is what is more. And apophthalem is also
Apothem.
Apothem. Concise, saying maximum life. I'm learning so many words. So many words. I'm a word man. I'm a word man. Or am I a man word? There's also something about the obiter dicta. Oh my gosh. What? There's no voice for it. Obiter dictum. A judge's expression of opinion uttered in court or in a written judgment, but not essential to the decision and therefore not legally binding as a precedent. An incidental remark. Ain't that something? Of Anaxagoras. He pointed out to those of the company that, as far as they were concerned, things would be just as they thought, and for heaven's sake, let's not forget Homer, who we are told espoused the same line. Does he not, after all, have Hector, of all people, in his recovery of consciousness after Ajax has floored him, lie there thinking other thoughts? What can this mean except that those whose thinking processes have been radically disrupted are, for all that, still thinking, only their thoughts are not the same? But then, surely, if both states involve kinds of thoughts, things in existence must also both be so and not be so. For if those very people who have gazed most on the truth as it's revealed to us, those who have devoted their lives to the search for truth, those who love the truth, if this is what they think, or at any rate officially say about the truth, how can that be anything other than a counsel of despair for anyone trying to start to do philosophy? If anything like these views is right, the search for truth is a wild goose chase. Let us then diagnose this error. The thinkers in question were after the truth about the things that are, but they supposed the things that are to be restricted to the sensibles. But in these there is a large presence of the indeterminate, and of that which is in the way explained above. Hence their position is far from absurd, but also far from true. Felicitously, to adapt to the dictum of Epicharmos and Xenophanes, another line of thought was that they observed that all nature around us undergoes change, and held that one cannot speak the truth about that which is undergoing change. So a fortiori, nothing true could be said about what is changing at all points in all ways. A fortiori. Anyway, I think I've read that one before, I just didn't remember it. I think it could be true, he said it better. It was from the seedbed of such thinking that there flowered the most extreme of the views we went through above. This position of those who appropriated the legacy of Heraclitus, notably Cratylus, his mature position was that speech of any kind was radically inappropriate, and that expression should be restricted exclusively to the movement of the finger. He was appalled that Heraclitus had claimed that you could not step twice into the same river. In his Cratylus, Cratalus's opinion, it was already going too far to admit to stepping into the same river once. Right. We, however, shall adopt the following with all this. Okay, there is a point in saying that what changes when it is actually changing is not. And yet, en fin de compte. French! Why with the French? English. Oh my gosh. I wrote that lying down, not looking at my keyboard. That was just a pure guess. At the bottom line. End of accounts. Doesn't count, it's not a real word, it's French. Anyway, at the bottom line, this conclusion can be resisted, for the property bearer is discarding a property retains some part of that which it is discarding, and similarly of that which comes into being. There must already have been something, quite generally, for every case in which something is destroyed, there will be, in that case, something that is. For every case in which something comes into being, there must necessarily be something from which it is produced, and something by which it is produced. And also, it is also necessary that an infinite regress not be generated. Even, however, if we refrain from this sort of solution, we must still distinguish changing in quantity from changing in quality. Nothing, let us allow, persists quantitatively, whereas it is to be persistent from that each thing is. From its persistent, whereas it is by its persistent form that each thing is known. Anyway, a rap on the knuckles is surely earned by anyone who, perceiving things to be thus in what is in any case the statistical exception, even of the sensibles, extrapolates the entire universe. Surely earned by anyone who, perceiving things to be thus in what is in any case the statistical observation, even of the Our little corner of the observable universe is quite unique in its constant exposure to birth and decay. It is entirely negligible component of the universe. As a whole, the verdict of a fair judge would be that our part can be let off because of good behavior, and the rest rather than vice versa. And why should we not also use against these opponents the same line that we originally took? It must be demonstrated to them that there is a kind of unchanging nature, this belief that they must acquire. Anyway, if you say that all things simultaneously both are and are not, you should say rather that everything is at rest than everything is in motion. There is no possible destination of change, what with everything already being a property of everything else. I never thought of that. I never thought about that. Change implies changing from something into something. But if everything is changing, then everything is at stasis. That's a really weird way of looking at it, but it's kind of true. Wow, that's really neat, actually. On the truth question, then, we reject the doctrine that whatever appears true. I'm going to stop after this last bit. Because I've really got to study for my uni exam. So on page 523, I'm going to stop. We have several reasons for doing this. The first is that even if special sensation is veridical, appearance production is not the same as sensation. Next, can this really be the issue? Whether magnitudes are equally great and colors of the same character as they appear at a distance or as they appear nearby? whether they are as they appear to those who are healthy or to those who are ill, and whether things are relatively heavy as they appear to the weak or to the strong, and whether those things are true that appear to those who are asleep and not to those who are awake. Clearly, at any rate, they do not take it to be the issue. None of them, I suppose, would if, while in Libya, he dreamt that he was in Athens, set off in the morning to Odeon. I don't know where Odeon is. You didn't see that. I do not live anywhere near that map. Odeon, Greece. Oh, it's a building in Athens. Right. Or not, it's in Ephesus. For the Odeon. Oh, so it's like going to the Greek theatre, I guess. And as far as the future is concerned, a point made by Plato is that the opinion of the doctor and that of the layperson are by no means on the same footing. With regard, shall we say, to whether someone will recover or not. Next, consider the senses themselves. A sense does not enjoy the same cognitive autonomy regarding non-proprietary or merely related object as with regard to its proper object. Rather, sight, not taste, has jurisdiction over color, and taste, not sight, over flavor. And it is never the case that each of these senses asserts of the same thing at the same time, that it is both and is not. F. Indeed, not even at different times there is agreement between them about the affection itself, but only about that to which it applies. What I mean is that the same wine, say, might be deemed, under appropriate changes either in its state or that of the body of the drinker, to be now sweet or not sweet. But the sweetness at the time when it was sweet does not change, ever. That's true, because when you use the definition of the law of non-contradiction, it's something being and not being at the same time, in the same instance. So, and the same right about its sweetness is at the same time as that of anything that will become sweet in the future. And yet it is just this that all these arguments undermine with their claim that since nothing has a substance, there is nothing that is of necessity. Since the necessary does not admit of being both F and not F, there being something of necessity is incompatible with its being F and not F. In general, the only thing that is the sensible object. The absence of the ensouled beings would mean the existence of nothing, given that no sensation would be taking place. But while the claim that in such circumstances there would be no sense objects and no sensations is very likely to be true, for they are both things that happen to some perceiver. It is an absurdity to argue that the underlying things that give rise to the sensation do not exist unless the sensation exists. In sensation, the subject is not presented with the sensation itself. There is rather something else over and above the sensation which is necessarily prior to the sensation. That's true. For that which produces change is by nature prior to that which undergoes it, a fact not diminished by being treated as correlative items. But this brings us to the real rub for this position. Alright, I think I'm going to leave it there because I have to study for my exams and I can't keep reading this. I've read it for like well over an hour now. Sorry, I'm cutting this one a bit short. I did want to get to the end, but it'll take me like another 10 minutes, like half an hour maybe, because I'm a slow reader. So we're just gonna leave things there. Thank you all for listening, the one viewer I have, thank you for listening to this stream, watching this stream. If you're watching this as a VOD, thanks for making this far. I don't think anyone would actually get to this part of the VOD, but yeah, overall, I am Sinner, and I will see you in the next one.